Before I tell you about the present, I ought to tell you about the past. You see, this horrible information has lent weight to what was already one of the most terrifying events from my childhood. My entire life, I felt keenly observed. Some claim there to be no scientific basis for that sensation, the feeling of a gaze or many gazes touching one's skin. They claim it to be an illusion. As a child, I used to tell myself this whenever I felt eyes upon me. But now I know better. In year 9, Miss Black arrived at our school and became, for only one lesson, the new religious education teacher. She spent 45 minutes mystified by me. That wasn't in my head. My friends commented as much. Her eyes lingered on my face even when I wasn't answering a question. It made me squirm. "Are you a Christian?" one girl asked the teacher. "Religious persecution is part of the human condition, so I keep my beliefs close to my chest," Miss Black replied, gaze locked on me, not the inquirer. "Ripe." "What did you say, miss?" asked another of my classmates. The teacher ignored him and continued with the lesson, but we all heard that out-of-place word. My friends repeated it mercilessly for the rest of the day. They joshed me with smooching noises and puckered lips, all the while refusing to take their own eyes off me, emulating my supposed admirer. I am grateful for that, however. Grateful for their steadfast mockery. Grateful that they clung to my side faux adoringly as we walked to the buses at the end of the school day. You see, if my friends hadn't been there to scream for help when Miss Black attempted to pack me into her rusted Kia, perhaps Mr. Alton wouldn't have rushed forwards in time. Perhaps I never would have been seen again. For many years, I woke in a sweat whenever recalling the many elements of that traumatic ordeal, which culminated in Mr. Alton shoving Miss Black to the asphalt and rescuing me from the back seat. I remember Miss Black's firm fingers clamping around the shoulder pads of my school blazer. I remember the putrid aroma of onions, cheese, and spices, meals woven into the leather chairs of her car. I remember the stained pillow and the scratchy blanket, suggesting that she had been living in there. I shuddered whenever I imagined what that would-be abductor had in store for me. But I may not have been frightened enough. Miss Black was arrested and my parents moved us to the other side of the country. However, even with that dangerous woman locked away, my fear of being watched only worsened. A doctor prescribed antidepressants to help with my phobia of being watched. Sure, the pills helped to dull the fear, helped to dull all of my emotions, rendering me a numb adolescent, near oblivious to the world around me. But they were still there, the eyes of the watchers. I just cared significantly less about them. Until this weekend. I came home from university to help Dad with some spring cleaning, as he had been complaining about clutter in the house, though it ended up being a matter of spring reshuffling, as things were simply being moved into the loft until my parents had the mental energy to decide what to do with them. My father was quite particular about the tidying process, repeatedly telling me to stick to my side. I had never been allowed in the attic as a child and I hardly seemed welcome there as an adult, but Mom had apparently forced him to ask me for help. His back was playing up, so he had been struggling to carry boxes on his own. Anyhow, I insisted that I would follow Dad's rules, which made him soften a little bit. He conceded that I had never disobeyed him before, so he'd trust me. And then came the second most frightening situation of my young life. While we were moving clutter into the loft, my father clutched his chest with his fingers bent at odd angles. "Dad?" I gasped. Most oddly of all, my father, legs buckling, seemed concerned only with the cardboard boxes at the side of the room. He tried to shove one in particular off the top of the stack, but both the box tower and his brittle body came tumbling down to the floorboards. I dropped to my knees beside him, and then twisted my head to the open attic door. "Mom, help!" A few seconds later, my mother, calling out for an explanation, came flying up the attic ladder. She wailed in horror at the sight of her husband lying half-conscious on the attic floor. Mom hurriedly rang the emergency line and then beckoned me towards her. "Come on, Charlie, get out of the attic." I frowned, eyeing Dad below me. "What? One of us needs to stay with them." "Charlie, I won't tell you." Mom began, but then a voice came from her phone, and she started to descend the ladder. "Yes, it's my husband, he's..." As she talked to the operator, I found myself focusing on something other than the man lying at my knees, teetering on the precipice of a cardiac arrest. Rather, I was focusing on my parents' odd behavior. Dad had knocked the boxes over intentionally. Mom hadn't wanted me to stay in the attic. Something was up. "Charlie," Dad wheezed after I had climbed to my feet and walked towards the top of the box, with the sealed lid that he had been trying to hide. I held up a hand. "Don't move, Mom's calling an ambulance." "Don't," he croaked, exerting whatever strength he had left, but every protest only motivated me further. I knelt before the unlabeled box, held together with sellotape robbed of any adhesiveness by time, and then I tore the flaps open with ease. Inside were discolored sheets of paper coated in orange mildew, mold, and ink. The sheets were made of fibers that felt like painful bristles to the touch, as if they might draw blood or burrow beneath my flesh. A horrifyingly inexplicable sensation that now I do not believe to have been imaginary. Those handwritten documents told a story that sickened me. Adam Darren, 10/2/2005. Blessed be, 11 pounds, blessed be. Adam smiles for the crescent moon. He is ripe for harvest. Blessed be. He shall end the world of men. He shall lead the chosen few. Blessed be. The poetic ramblings meant little to me, but the date of birth certainly didn't. The 10th of February 2005, my birthday. My father painfully pleaded, "Don't touch them, please." I found an old Polaroid at the bottom of the box, displaying dozens of people standing in a field on a sunny day. A timid moon hung above, half hidden by the blue of the sky. There was nothing immediately odd about the people. They wore ordinary clothes, denims and cottons. At the front, a blonde-haired couple held a blue bundle between them, a towel cushioning a newborn baby, his cherub face peeking out. And a few feet to the side of them, wearing smiles tinged with falseness and fear, were two adults that caught my eye, 20 years younger but instantly recognizable. Mom and Dad. "Stop touching them, Charlie." Dad begged, and I turned to see him reaching towards me painfully. "They'll have found us by now." "The ambulance is on its way," Mom called as she hurried back up the attic ladder, and when she saw the relics in my hands, her eyes widened. In a demanding tone, I asked her, "What are these?" "You touched them," she whispered, eyes flitting to the attic window fearfully. "Who is this child?" I growled, jabbing at the picture. "Why are you and Dad in this picture?" "We should have burnt that box," Mom whimpered as she walked over to me. "Maybe it's not too late." "No," Dad weakly protested, choking on the word. Mom knelt beside him and took his hand. "The operator said we need to get you into a comfortable." "Don't destroy any of it," Dad pleaded, ignoring his wife's pleas. "That'll only make it worse. We have to run, we have to." "Are these my real parents?" I interrupted, cheeks red with rage, pointing at the baby in the photo. "Am I Adam?" My mom averted my gaze, answering me without saying a word. As my fingers gripped the Polaroid's plastic coating, I heard voices pouring out of the picture, jubilant voices, though nothing about their joy put me at ease. It haunted me. Haunted me because I felt as if I were bound to a force, both internal and external, unlike any earthly thing that I had ever experienced. Horrified by the sensation, I dropped the contents of the box and my parents let out a collective sigh of relief. But then my free-willed feet carried the rest of my body over to the attic window. Standing at the other side of the road was a man in a parka. Just a man, an ordinary man. But he was eyeballing me, looking straight up at the window. He mouthed a word at me. I don't know how to read lips, but I'm certain of what he said. Ripe. He began to sprint towards our front door. A shoe sole pummeled against the front door 2 floors below, and my questions no longer mattered. All that mattered was the very primitive and pressing urge in my head to escape, to survive. And upon hearing the sound of the intruder, my parents shared a knowing look, before screaming in unison, "Run!" Terrified beyond words, I slid down the ladder, leaving my sobbing mother and weak father behind. I scurried into my old bedroom, tuning out the sound of wood tearing from hinges downstairs. Feet pounded across the lobby. I tore open the bedroom window and eyed the branch of the oak tree a couple of feet away. As the stranger came upstairs and my heart pounded against my ribcage, I took a deep breath. Then for the first time since my reckless youth, I jumped. A cry of frustration came from behind me as I clumsily caught the thick branch like a monkey bar. After scaling down the tree, I looked up in terror to see that the man was standing in the window, fingers clutching the edge of the frame. He had been a moment from snatching me. I fled as an ambulance siren filled the street. For the past day, I've been hopping from bus to bus. I haven't slept. I'm too afraid to contact my parents, but now that I put some distance between myself and that horrifying photograph, which seemed to call out to a frightful force that I do not understand, I'm starting to see a little more clearly. Yesterday, I needed only to escape. Now I need answers. Who am I? And who are the people watching me? Perhaps not the exact demonic being from Christian eschatology, given that my story concerns neither heaven nor hell, neither God nor the devil. Still, I don't know a better word to describe me. Regardless of my cult's specific religious ideology, the fact of the matter remains that I was born with a godless purpose. Much like Lucifer himself, I was conceived to bring about the end of mankind. On Tuesday, after a sleepless night and a day of bus hopping from city to city, I eventually wandered into a library, hoping that I had put enough distance between myself and that home intruder. My chest still fluttered with adrenaline. I had not felt terror like that since Miss Black nearly stole me from the world as a boy. And I believed my father, that touching the photograph in those documents had been the gateway to those people. I didn't believe in the supernatural until I felt it for myself. A force beyond earthly explanation. I don't know how to describe the sensation, but I felt those people, the ones who made me. I saw them and they saw me, and I knew that I had to do whatever possible to stop them from finding me again. Using a library computer, I reached out on Reddit and other online forums asking for information as to the identities of these people. I expected it to be difficult to find answers about a cult of, judging by the photograph, only 50 people. But I learned that I was dealing with something bigger than that. The cult is named the Old Collective. It's a community of folk who have long practiced occult rituals, all in the name of saving humanity. Their goal has long been to kill the many and save the few. Not for the sake of preserving the planet, but for building a new status quo. Building a dark and brutish wasteland with them and their god of flesh as its ruler. All they ever needed to carry out their unholy plan is a vessel to become their god of flesh. And worst of all, I learned that this cult numbers in the thousands, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of members across the world. This opened up an entirely new compartment of fear in my chest. You see, at first, I imagined that the home intruder had walked through some spectral gateway to reach my location within a matter of mere minutes. The reality, however, was perhaps worse. He had simply been nearby. This cult is so large and so pervasive in global civilization that these monsters are everywhere. You live near these people, they walk among you, in your city, your town, your village. People who want to end you and everything that you love. I realized as I sat in the middle of that library with teary eyes surveying my surroundings fearfully, that there wasn't a bus in the world that could take me away from them. Nowhere was safe. I had to find a way to make myself safe. I eventually stumbled across a private Discord server titled 11 concerning matters of the occult. The conversation quickly took quite a turn. I began, "How do I contact my parents safely?" "Don't. But I need to find out whether they made it to the hospital. If they're still alive, it's only because the Old Collective has allowed it, perhaps to draw you back there." "Yeah, he's right. You can't trust anybody. These people have spent 20 years searching for you and they'll never give up. They'll try to bait you somewhere. Don't stay in any one place for too long." My father still didn't fully explain how they found us the first time. Those papers in that photo were spiritual instruments imbued with a spiritual link between you and the Old Collective. One touch allows you to see them and them to see you. It's a bridge of the mind, of the spirit, of the soul. But they won't find me now, right? Without those spiritual instruments. You can't outrun this, Adam. Please don't call me that, I'm Charlie. You sound like one of them. Yeah, right back at you too. Are you keeping safe, Charlie? Sure, I'm using a public computer rather than my phone, though I know these people use rituals and old magic to search for me. That doesn't mean that they can't find you through technology too. I would leave that library right now if I were you. Another ominous message. I found myself agreeing with Yell 10. It seemed like this blue man almost admired at the old collective. And then I received a private message. Yell 10 said, I don't often advocate doxing, but if somebody has the technological wherewithal to uncover the location of, say, a certain blue man, then that somebody might provide you with this. Below this message was the shared Google location just outside Paris of a phone belonging to a man whose identity I won't share here. Why would you give this to me? If he's with the old collective and you get the jump on him, you'll get answers. I don't know how I found agreeing to something so ludicrous, but I got up from the chair in the library and hurriedly made my way out, head pounding painfully. I also don't know how I so easily convinced myself to pour a hefty chunk of my student loan into a plane ticket of all things in the middle of the week. But then again, I had more to fear than missing lectures and assignments. I still wanted to believe that this whole ordeal to be in my head, my aching head. Wanted to believe that I hadn't seen or felt a thing while holding that photograph and those pieces of paper. That there had been no intruder in our home. That Mom and Dad were sitting in the hospital somewhere, wondering why their son had vanished for 24 hours. But I knew better. I felt the prick when I touched that first document. Not a paper cut, but some living thing within the paper. And I saw people standing in all parts of the world, watching and smiling at me. It was no dizzy spell that took a hold of me. Moreover, when I arrived in Paris late on Tuesday evening, I realized I was making a grave mistake. Yet that didn't stop me. It didn't convince me to cancel the Uber to Blue Man's apartment building. Didn't convince me to get off the pavement, from which I stood and eyeballed the large limestone structure, towering 4 stories above me, and didn't convince me to run when the hairs on the back of my neck stood to attention. And then came a brutish hand around my neck and it clamped firmly against my mouth. I unleashed a terrified screech, pleading for my life as I was dragged into an alleyway opposite the apartment building. And I decided that this must be it. The terrifying end to my short-lived quest for answers. I sobbed and shrieked and begged for mercy in a muffled voice, all while attempting and failing to come to terms with the seeming inevitability of my oncoming demise. "Quiet!" hissed my assailant. "I will let my hand go, Mr. Charlie, but you must stop. Please, I'm not with them, I'm not." My eyes broadened as I realized it was him. Blue Man. I elbowed the man, propelling myself forward, and then spun around with fists raised, and he held his hands up defensively. "You shouldn't have come here," he said in a breathy voice. "They tricked you. They're already in your head. You can feel them squirming around in there, can't you?" I gulped, trying to ignore the pounding sensation in my skull. "Who are you?" "We have to get away from here," Blue Man pleaded in a whisper. "There's someone in my apartment, 3rd floor. They used me as bait to find you." I looked up at the 3rd floor, following Blue Man's shaky finger to a row of lit windows. Figures walked past the glass panes, searching for the Frenchman who had escaped and seemingly waited for me to show. Waited to apprehend me before the old collective could do so. I believed them, and call it my sixth sense, just like my sense that, as Blue Man had said, these people had wormed their way into my brain ever since I had touched the things in that box. And the thought of them rummaging around up there much as they were rummaging around through Blue Man's apartment filled me with a deep and unyielding horror. When I snapped back into reality, I realized that I was still staring at the lit windows of Blue Man's apartment, but all movement had stopped behind the glass panes. There were 3 silhouettes standing and looking out at the night, looking out at us. Blue Man and I jolted on the spot as the lights in the apartment suddenly cut out. "They're coming," he murmured, backing down the alley. "Come on, we've got to go." We both turned to flee but stopped immediately in our tracks. The dark outlines of heads were visible at the far end of the alley, men and women obstructing our path. "Shit," Blue Man whispered, turning back to the main road. "Okay, we'll go this." The man grabbed a hold of my arm just below the sleeve of my white tee and unleashed an almighty scream, the most horrific scream that I had ever heard. It was something beyond human, for he suffered a pain that no human should suffer. And as he recoiled from me, it was my turn to scream in horror. For Blue Man's skin bore cracks that were spreading across his flesh and painting his arms, then his cheeks and presumably his entire body. And in a swift act of what I choose to see as mercy, all was over in a matter of seconds. Bubbling blood emitting steam poured through the wounds, red-hot blood spilling out of a body boiling alive. And then, like a glass cracking from thermal stress, Blue Man's entire form shattered spontaneously, reducing him to a pool of indistinguishable mush on the floor. Since touching the things in that box, something had awoken within me, something that made me an abomination to the touch, the ender of humanity. I wailed, stumbling into the street as the horrifying figures from the alley in Blue Man's apartment building began to surround me. I shivered, terrified beyond words, in the center of the road as I prepared to meet my end. And then came a brilliant burst of thought. Whether internal or external, I do not care. But as the connection between the old collective and me strengthened, and I had visions of the many thousands of followers across the world, an ingenious idea struck me. An idea struck by the hellish end to which Blue Man had just succumbed. When those people and I were connecting like that, whether in our minds or some spiritual realm, it was almost like touching Blue Man. And as I had terrifying visions of those many nightmarish figures across the world searching for me, intending to use me for awful and unspeakable things, I decided to let them reach out, to let them touch me through that spiritual plane. In fact, I begged them to do so, and they foolishly did. And then came the screams. The screams of those dozens of monsters surrounding me on the street, moments away from getting their greedy mitts on me. I don't know whether they had even thought about the situation in their collective delirium, thought about what had just happened to Blue Man. A mere touch of my skin and his blood had boiled, had poured through opening fissures in his skin. And now the same fate was befalling each of them. It might have befallen others across the world, I don't know how far it reached. All I know is that I felt them reaching out in my mind, and something within me reached back. Something dark that they had put inside me. And that is what I fear most, even now after fleeing France and putting distance between myself and that awful cult. I realize that I cannot run. Even if I were to end every last cult member on Earth, I wouldn't be killing the true evil that hunts me, and has hunted me since my birth. After all, I put an end to them, but not to myself, not to the thing inside me. I have no control over any of this. It was all planned out for me, and I am as much a victim as any of you. I was created to end the world. Will I stop here? It's baffling to me that the world keeps turning, oblivious to the hellish week that I've just endured. Oblivious to the fact that we all barely survived at the end of the world. Oblivious to the fact that it may still end. Following the events at the foot of that Parisian apartment, the bloody fragments of Blue Man and the shattered cultists inexplicably turned to ash and were brushed upwards by the breeze. That dusty tempest beat against my skin, sticking those specks of people tightly to my fearful and paralyzed body. A reminder of what I had done. A reminder of the evil coursing through my veins. Something haunting that possessed me. I knew that I should keep moving, should burn through my meager funds, traveling as far as I could in any direction so as to not be found again, so as to become someone other than Charlie, someone other than Adam, the harbinger of the apocalypse for whom the old collective was searching. But I didn't have the stomach to truly leave it all behind. I wanted to go home. I felt alone and exposed. I felt stalked as ever by eyes only human on the surface. At the age of 20, having lived and studied as a university student for 2 years, I had long thought myself to be a grown-up, to be strong and independent. However, facing nightmares beyond myself had unveiled the truth, that I was, beneath it all, still a child. And though I tried, I couldn't help myself. I reverted back to being a boy desperate for his mother and father. So I did exactly what the old collective expected of me. I took a flight home, and I was very nearly lulled into a false sense of security at the airport by the crowds of everyday people, nattering and chattering about trivial things. But this was only a coddling blanket, as it tricked me back into my old self, the one who didn't believe in forces higher than ourselves, the one who believed only in the very grounded and very real world that we all see with our eyes. It must have been a trauma response to the terrifying things that I had seen and endured in Paris. By the time that I landed in Manchester, I was blindly eager to see my parents. All thought of danger had fled my mind. All I thought was that they must have been worried sick about me for the past few days, that they may well have been home from the hospital already, sitting at home and awaiting my return. They didn't call, I reminded myself. That might have been a cause for concern had I been thinking clearly. But when the nurses and doctors at the local hospital told me that nobody by the name of my father had been admitted within the past week, I felt a pang of fear. The mental alarm bells started to toll quietly, clanging in a near inaudible rhythm. But still, I tried my hardest to ignore my mind, screaming at me to run, and decided instead to escalate the matter. I asked to talk to somebody about the ambulance's service records, as a vehicle had very clearly been dispatched to my street. I had heard the siren as I fled. They found a record of my mom's emergency call, found a member of staff who had been dispatched to the street, but nobody was there. The paramedic explained. We knocked on the door and then tried to access the property and finally called the fire department to assist. But when we searched your house, we found neither your mother nor your father. They may well face legal action for the false call, so... It wasn't a false call. I interrupted breathlessly. They should have been there, Weren't you with them? Asked the paramedic. I gulped and then lied. I went out to the shop when Mom called me. And then you waited 2 days to come to the hospital looking for your father. The paramedic asked, eyes narrowing suspiciously. I shook my head and then started backing away, not looking to find myself in any sort of trouble. For all I knew, eyes were watching me. The news of my parents' disappearance had woken up something in me, had reminded me of the very present danger encroaching from all sides, suffocating me. I have to find them, I hoarsely croaked, turning on my heel and quickly striding away before the paramedic could probe any deeper into the odd turn of events. I left the building, eyes stinging with a starting set of teardrops. I was moments away from bursting into full-blown bawling, but then I was overcome by a sudden sense of purpose, a sudden idea to be exact. The old collective had my parents and I knew how to find them, but I would have to face one of my oldest fears. I took a long taxi ride to Cheshire and was dropped off at Style Prison, an ominous cluster of buildings in the sense that they appeared more like haunted houses than the wards of a penitentiary. Red-bricked, 2-story buildings with stunted chimneys. Only the sign gave away that I had stumbled not into a residential street but a prison. Welcome to HMP and YOI Style, building hope, changing lives. And the inmate that I had come to visit was, as I'm sure you've deduced, my old religious education teacher, Miss Black, the woman who attempted to steal me from the world as a child. Has she had many visitors over the past 6 years? I asked. No, the officer bluntly replied, and that was the end of the conversation. The prison officer led me down dimly lit corridors in one of the smaller buildings. I looked out of the windows, but sunshine did nothing to cut through the gloom of the place. I had seen many friendly faces in the prison, inmates and officers alike, but this particular man was the first who seemed cold and distant. I had the strangest feeling that it had something to do with the woman that he was taking me to visit. Might I ask why we won't be talking in the visitor center? I asked politely as the man stopped in front of a particular door, shaky fingers around the door handle. We bend the rules for her, he whispered, voice nearly cracking. It's better for everyone when she stays in here. As the prison officer unlocked the door, I turned a little pale and barked. Wait. He sighed and turned to face me. What? I started shivering. I don't know about this. And the man simply nodded as if fully understanding. Do you want me to lock this door? I should lock it and then you should go home and never come back here. The prison officer extended his free hand towards me, possibly to comfortingly pat me on the shoulder, but I retreated with wide, fearful eyes, remembering what had happened when Blue Man's skin met mine. I had a horrifying flashback of his body overflowing with piping hot blood, moments before his flesh burst completely. I didn't want to risk touching another person again. Didn't want to risk even thinking of another person, as I'd somehow fated the cultist to these same ends by merely letting our minds connect. I realized that I had no control of the thing hiding within me, or perhaps more terribly, that the thing had all of the control. I keep thinking that perhaps Adam has always been the real child. As far as I know, I am the being hitching a ride in a demonic creature, Anyhow, the prison officer seemed startled by my fearful and retreating reflex, but he quickly returned his hand to his side. "Why?" I whispered, infected by the man's contagious terror. "Why are you so afraid of her?" He said, "Because bad things happen to people who so much as look at her. Things I don't even know how to explain. Deaths, maims, and other nightmares that she couldn't have possibly have caused, but she's somehow always to blame. We all feel it, so we all just stay away from her. It's happened time and time again to inmates and officers. They go back to their cells or homes and then they suffer horrible fates. And it'll happen to you too, kid. So I'll ask you one more time. Do you want me to lock this door?" I shook my head and the officer offered me a pitying look and then a head nod. He flung the door open and stepped back, shakily motioning for me to step inside. He mumbled something about me hollering for him if necessary, but there was a pleading tone to his voice. "I beg of you, kid, don't holler for me. Don't make me go in there with you." Miss Black sat on the bottom bunk of her two-person room which, through a series of horrifying supernatural events, she had snagged for herself. Undoubtedly, given the prison officer's story, nobody would want to share a cell with such a haunting woman. There was nothing comforting about seeing her with graying locks of hair and tired eyes winged with crow's feet. Age had not weakened her in my eyes. If anything, it only afforded greater depths of wisdom and nightmarish power, made her somehow less human in my eyes. "Adam," Miss Black whispered, meeting my gaze with teary eyes and a jubilant smile. "You came back to me, to us, as foretold." I shuddered in horror at those two final words. I had come there of my own free will, my own volition. I had been certain of that. But Miss Black made me doubt everything, instilled me with dread greater than even that of my 14-year-old self. I felt lesser than I had on that day, with my schoolmates calling for Mr. Alton to save me. Because I was alone this time. "Where are my parents?" I wheezed. "Oh, the defectors," Miss Black asked. "I've heard stories of them, stories of you. When you were born, we traveled from far and wide, from all corners of the earth to see you. But I was not blessed to. Please," I begged, "they're gone and I need them." "They abandoned you," Miss Black hissed, brows suddenly lowering and gentle demeanor turning dark. It almost felt as if the sun had dimmed beyond her barred glass pane. "They defected from us and they defected from you. They will pay when the crescent moon comes, when you rise to your fullest." My lips quivered. "Please, you have to know something. Where are they?" The woman smiled. "I am but one of many. Look at me rotting away in this cage. The old ones have not come to collect me, have they? I don't know why you would imagine that I know anything about your filthy abductors." "They're my parents," I screamed at the woman, fists clenching and eyes burning, with neither tears nor rage, but something that I didn't understand. She smiled widely and I saw a glint of red in her eyes, but it didn't come from her. It was a reflection of my own scorching pupils. I unclenched my fists and stumbled backwards, moaning in abject fear at whatever I had just experienced. Whatever I had felt burgeoning within me, threatening to bubble to the surface. I felt the red flit away from my retinas, but it was still there, lurking behind them, lurking deep within me. And no matter how lovingly Miss Black looked at me, I knew that I wasn't the chosen one at all. I was a vessel for something deeper and darker that had been hibernating within me for 20 years. Something on the verge of coming out, of replacing me. "You are so nearly ready," she giggled tearfully. I gulped and turned. "I'm leaving now." "Wait," she screeched, halting me in my tracks. "I'll help you. I'm connected to the old collective. I'm sure they will know what happened to your mother and father." Those last 3 words were practically spat out of Miss Black's mouth, as if they tasted sour and poisonous on her tongue. I knew she was fooling me somehow. Knew that given her desperation for me to stay, I should leave even more hurriedly. Should be doing whatever possible to not give her what she wanted. But I needed Mom and Dad. I turned and nodded. "Please," she smiled. "As you will it, Adam. Blessed be." When she opened her mouth, I expected words to come out. Some ritualistic chanting in a foreign language, something that would summon her fellow cultists to the prison. But instead, however, her mouth kept opening, wider and wider in both height and width. And my own lips could only open so far as I screamed at the impossibility before me. Screamed as her lips widened to fill the whole room. Widened and barreled towards me. I banged feverishly on the door, shrieking at the top of my lungs for the prison officer to let me out. But either he had scampered from the scene or Miss Black had already swept me away from that world. And then I fell into her blackened maw, shrieking until my vocal cords gave out. And then came blinding white from the black. And when I rubbed my eyes, my vision eventually adjusted to the blazing sun above, to the blue and yellow above, to the green below. I felt grass scratching my skin and I sat up, immediately feeling a lurch in my gut. I recognized that place. It was the field from the photograph in my parents' attic. I had returned home, and not spiritually, not in some vision that Miss Black had cast. She had impossibly flung my body from that cell in the prison to a distant rural land, the land in which I had been born, the land to which pilgrims of the old collective had fled from across the world to see me, their chosen one, their bringer of humanity's end. "Charlie!" screamed a voice from behind me. I shot to my feet and spun to see a horrifying sight. Swaying upside down from the upper beam of a wooden structure, shaped like a football goalpost, were my parents bound by their ankles. And behind them, in a group of 20 or 30, stood members of the old collective. "He's returned to us!" cried a shrill voice from the crowd. "Yes, Sister Black shall be rewarded," came a deeper voice. "Run, Charlie!" my mom begged a second time. She was silenced by a swift thump to the head with one man's wooden stick. "Please," I begged, staggering forwards through the grass. "Just let my parents go." "Your parents?" came a woman's voice from the crowd. And then they emerged, the blonde couple from the photo. Of course, 20 years later, their hair bore quite a few white strands, but they were unmistakably the two who had been holding the baby in the picture. I felt sick. "Adam," the man whispered, "we've spent 2 decades searching for you. Our boy, blessed be, his wife blubbered. The two walked hand in hand towards me, and I cast my eyes to my true parents, swinging upside down from the wooden beam. Not the ones who created me, but the ones who raised me, the ones who saved me from this nightmare. "Please," I begged the blonde couple in fear, and then I forced out the words, "Mom and Dad." I let them embrace me, as terrified as I felt. Their skin didn't crack and blood didn't spill loose, which only filled me with hellish questions. Why wasn't Blue Man spared the same fate? And what am I? "Our son," my biological father whispered into my fear as the pair squeezed me more tightly. I shivered, realizing that our minds were connected, that he could read my every thought and desire, that he knew I was lying, that I didn't see them as mother and father, that I didn't care about the old collective, and I would burn it all down to save my real parents. What horrified me above all else was that they didn't seem to care, not a single member of the cult. This only made me fear that they, much like the nightmare dwelling within my body, held all of the cards, held the true power in the scenario, and that I, Charlie, would die as soon as the time had come, as soon as I had become ripe. My biological mother whispered tearfully in my other ear, "You are so nearly there, Adam." "I'm Charlie," I sniffled, and then their hands dug more deeply into my flesh. I tried to scream, but something held my tongue, that thing within. "You are Adam," the blonde man hissed. "Charlie is a lie that will die under the crescent moon." "Soon, my darling," his wife whispered as the pair pulled away from me. "Blessed be." The man sighed, eyeing me softly again. "Blessed be." "What do I have to do to free them?" I asked, watching my teary-eyed parents squirm in the restraints. "Who's in charge?" My cult mother smiled. "The crescent moon." To add emphasis to this answer, my cult father thrust his finger towards my chest and I looked down, feeling a jolt course across my skin and through my core. I felt it behind my ribcage. The irregularity. It was like a beating drum, not a heart. We are not built to be aware of our own organs, our own innards. But my biological father had made me with the touch of his finger, so horribly aware of my inner cogs, of my crescent-shaped heart. There came chest pain, and I looked down to see something pressing through my chest, pressing through the fabric of my shirt. A half-moon outline. I fell to my knees in the grass, hyperventilating as I realized that the members of the old collective weren't waiting for a crescent moon in the sky. The crescent moon was me, the heart within me, the living thing waiting to awaken, waiting to ripen. Charlie is a lie, the blonde man reiterated more softly. You will come to understand that, Adam, when you, like the rest of us, bow to the crescent moon. But we must help you along, boy, for you have been led astray for too many years by these blasphemers. My biological father took a few purposeful strides towards my mother and father swaying in the air. Go to hell, my true dad growled. The blonde man chuckled. I'll show you the afterlife of the one true religion sinner. My biological mother offered me what almost appeared to be empathy. We're sorry for this, Adam. But then the cultist, in one swift motion, drew a blade from his belt and ran it across my father's throat. My mother and I screamed in unison as a river of red ran out of his wound, spilling over my father's spluttering mouth. A moment later, the cultist ran that same blade through the flesh of my mother's throat. I wailed in agony, watching my true parents wriggle in the restraints as the blood drained from their still-alive bodies. But it didn't take long for my father to stop moving, and my mother, desperately trying to mouth some words to me with her dying lips, eventually hung still too. And now, my biological father announced, turning to face me, it is time to drain you, Adam. As the man walked towards me wielding that blood-stained blade, I felt fear grip every inch of my body, fear beyond anything primal, as I questioned what would become of me after my throat had been slit and my body had been left. Would my body rise again as something else, though? I clutched my temples and closed my eyes, trying to ignore the fear in my heart as the man's feet squelched against the grass and my horrifying end approached. And then I saw them in my mind's eye, the faces of the cultists standing in that field, watching me from the execution site, watching my father walk towards me. Within my mind, I reached out and touched them all. It was an act of self-defense and rage and sorrow. I kept my eyes closed as the screaming started, but I saw the horror behind closed eyes. Saw it through our accursed spiritual connection. The cracking skin fissures letting blood run free, and then the shattering of the bodies one by one. Only my biological mother and father remained, lying in the grass when I opened my eyes. I towered over them, resisting the urge to let that hate flare in my pupils, the redness that I had seen reflected in Miss Black's own eyes. But it was too late. As my blonde parents clung to their last moments of life, skin cracking and steaming blood spilling free, they both smiled at me. Blessed be, croaked my mother. With this act, you have prepared yourself for the harvest. She shattered, and my father didn't even flinch, didn't let their smile waver for a second. Ripe, he croaked as his very lips began to fragment, and his body began to fall apart. One more time, Adam. And then I was left standing again in an empty field, accompanied only by a gust of ash in the air and my true parents, pale corpses hanging from a wooden beam. But the true horror survived within my chest, that crescent-shaped abomination, with a life of its own, threatening to break free. Threatening next time to connect with every last person on Earth, turning them all to ash and leaving me as the last thing alive. One more time, Adam. I understand now. With every tap into that thing within me, I made it stronger. I brought it closer to fully taking the reins. Mom and Dad were shielding me from myself, hoping that I would never unlock that part of me, that I would never become what the old collective had made me to be. I don't know how they woke up, became human again, and left the old collective behind, taking me with them. But I have to believe that the same can be achieved by others across the world, for they are many, so many, and that terrifies me. Please, I beg any of the members reading this, see sense, stop this nightmare. Don't let that thing take me. Nobody will survive.